I hope you all enjoyed that extra hour of sleep last night. I did. It's great. So several years ago now, I was taking a yoga class with my instructor, Barbara, and she would often start our time together with a poem or some kind of inspirational message. And one day she brought in a picture that she had clipped from a yoga magazine that she had. It was a picture of a 93-year-old woman in this long, flowing red gown. And she was striking a yoga pose, graceful and yet very strong. And the image itself was really breathtaking, but what really captured my attention was the caption underneath the picture that quoted the woman as saying, "I wake up every morning knowing this will be the best day of my life." I wake up every morning knowing that this will be the best day of my life. And Barbara asked us, what would it feel like to wake up every morning and affirm that? That, you know, to not buy into the myth that the burdens that we carry on this day are going to be something that makes this particular day unworthy of living. What this woman was experiencing and expressing was a very radical act of gratitude, of waking in the morning and having an expectation that this would be her best day. And knowing that if you take the time to affirm that perhaps that will lead you to actually notice the kinds of things that you are experiencing that day, to simply be grateful, even if she doesn't feel grateful, because being grateful is actually a practice. It's something that we need to pay attention to on a regular basis. The words that I used for our meditation this morning from Walden are part of the introduction to that book. First published in 1854, and the book describes Thoreau's experience of going into a cabin in the woods on Walden Pond for 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days. Not really sure why he chose that length of time, but 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days he spent in this cabin. And even though the book is formulated in such a way that it looks like it took only a single year. But the cabin acts as kind of a hermitage for Thoreau, from which he identifies plants, dates, and describes the freezing and the thawing of the pond, does a lot of reading and writing and reflecting on the specific themes of life that he feels are absolutely essential to living. And he tries to let go of all of the things that are not essential and to be particularly grateful for those essential things. Walden's often seen as a book about self-sufficiency, and it is about self-sufficiency, but even more, it is a book about paying attention. It is a call to have kind of an elastic sense of time, of liminal space to figure some things out. People often ask, why did Thoreau go into the woods? What was it about this particular time? Did he do this just so he could write this book? E.B. White says that when he went into the woods, he did it as a, quote, man torn between two powerful and opposing drives, the desire to enjoy the world and the urge to set the world straight. Thoreau was experiencing a deep internal shift of some sort, a life transition that required some liminal space. And when I say liminal space, what I mean is a space and time when we are making kind of an internal transition where we feel like we're not the old person we were, but we're not yet the new person that we want to become. And often that requires that we spend some time, that elastic time of paying attention to what is around us. It is also a good time to deepen our practice of gratitude, to make sure that we are paying attention to and being grateful for everything that passes before us in that liminal space. There are seasons of our lives, I think, times of transition. Sometimes these times happen quickly because of forces outside that are, causing us to change. Sometimes it's a more slow internal process. Something inside is telling us that we need to have a change, like Thoreau is going through. Some life experiences like graduations, weddings, childbirth, illness, loss, retirement, big moves in time and space, even cultural changes such as this COVID pandemic cause us to experience change. Those are changes that happen kind of from the outside in. But there are also changes that happen to us from the inside out as we become, for some reason, kind of restless and we need a change. Something is calling us to reshape our lives in some way. And this also needs a deepening practice of gratitude. There are a lot of books about life transitions. I'm thinking especially about Gail Sheehy's book on called Passages, where she describes the different adult life crises that we can expect to happen. One of my favorite books about transitions is Richard Rohr's book called Falling Forward, which is about two halves of life. The first half of life being that where we are developing a personality, developing an ego, a strong ego. We're developing our brand, making a home, kind of building the container that we want our lives to be like and look like, and successfully answer questions like, who am I? What do I believe? How do I want to support myself? Who am I going to take on my journey with me? And then he says there is a second half of life where we begin looking at what we really want that container to hold. What is that container for? What do we want our legacy to be? What does all this mean? Sometimes this means that we need to begin looking more deeply into where we're headed. We may have been climbing a ladder, but maybe we discover we're not so happy with the house that it's set up against. This is the second half of life. Each of these transitions that happen from the inside out or the outside in are divine messengers that cause us to look for how we want to change our lives. Carl Jung, who was a a wonderful psychologist who also had a deep feeling for mythology and religious traditions, was the first to popularize this idea of having two halves of life. But then he also expanded it. And he said, no, actually, we live our lives in quarters. He called them the 4 quaternities of life, if we are lucky enough to live an entire lifespan. And he says there is a major spiritual shift that takes place in each of these quarters. And each transition requires liminal space and hopefully a wise mentor or friend who can listen to us, and a deepening of our practice of gratitude, because we are always letting something go when we go through this liminal space in order to make room for something new. I have found that in my work as a spiritual director, which I've been doing for the last couple of years now, this idea of quaternities has been really helpful to me, because I often find that people come to a spiritual director or a spiritual guide in times of these kinds of transitions, in one of these 3 transition periods. People will say to me, you know, my life is going really well. I don't know why I need to talk to somebody about what's happening, because things are going well, but I just feel this shift happening inside of me, and it's making me kind of nervous. There are about 8,000 days between the time you were born to the time that you graduate from college, or set up a business, or in some way begin to transition away from family to setting up your own shop, kind of more or less, you know. There are another 8,000 days from that period until midlife. And then there are another 8,000 days from midlife to the time when most people retire. And if we're lucky, another 8,000 days from the time we retire until we go over the waterfall. That translates to about almost 22 years. So think about it in terms of a 22-year-old, a 44-year-old, a 66-year-old, and an 88-year-old, or thereabouts. Each time we go through one of those transitions, we have to kind of fine-tune our lives. It's also true that most of us feel a little bit of restless energy every 7 years. So think about it in terms of every 3rd time your 7 years is up, you need to make a really major transition. There has to be some sort of serious thinking about, what is that bag you've been dragging behind you for the last 22 years? I'm not talking about people. You know, we're not talking about what people you're dragging behind you. We're talking about what ideas, what maybe things that you own, lots of things, you know, what has sustained you so far for the last 22 years that you no longer need in order to make this transition to the next quarter of your life. Each quarter has different tasks that need to be completed. And so you need new tools to acquire. The other interesting piece of Jung's theory about these quarters is that he said the way we go through these quarters and the tools that we need for each quarter depends on our personality type. He was actually the first person to start looking at personality types that later got formulated into the Myers-Briggs personality type indicator, right? So knowing your Myers-Briggs might tell you what kind of tools you need for that next quarter of life and what that's going to look like. This is a topic that I'm thinking about writing a whole sermon on it for January. So, because I find it fascinating the way that we go through these quarters. I want to give you a personal example of how this worked for me as I got to the age of 66. I remember sitting down to my desk on a snowy January morning. I was on study leave from my regular congregational duties. I would always take a week off every January to sit at my desk and start planning for the next year, right? I would start planning what sermons I was going to write, what themes I was going to look at, what books I needed to purchase in order to do that, what kind of programming we were going to have in the congregation, what classes I needed to teach. And I always looked forward to this week because I tend to be a planner. I love planning. And as I sat down to the desk that day, this is almost 3 years ago now, I couldn't think of a single thing I wanted to do. Not a single thing. And how did that make me feel? I was really scared. I was really scared and really anxious. But my friends, this is how our divine messengers often come to us. By being scared, by being anxious, by being restless, having a really negative feeling. That's often how these transitions begin. Something new was beginning to brew. I had no idea what it was. I had no idea what it meant. Nothing had changed in my outer world. But I found myself that week, that whole week, and please don't ever tell anybody at the congregation that I served in Hillsborough about this, but instead of doing my planning on my study leave, I spent that whole week walking along the riverbank and chopping wood. I needed liminal space in which to begin making some changes. And then I remembered this idea of Jung's about the quaternities of life. And I thought, there it is. And even having that realization, I didn't want to change anything yet. But I knew that something was brewing. These transitions require both inner and outer work. Outer work, regarding outer work, the kinds of things I needed to work on was thinking about how I was going to transition from my 50-hour work weeks of parish ministry to something different. I needed to spend more time exercising. I needed to make sure my will was updated. I needed to think about how I was going to simplify my life and cook from scratch and, consider what I needed to do to live on a smaller salary. I started thinking about the justice work that I'd been doing, which has always been one of my favorite parts of ministry, was being out there, leading the charge on different social justice aspects. And I found myself needing to look for young, smart mentors that were leading the charge for social justice and look for ways that I could support them rather than being out there myself on the front lines. I wanted to learn to be more of a follower than a leader. But most importantly was the inner work. The fact that all of this coincided with the pandemic was really, really interesting because I think in the last and final quarter of the game, which I'm now in, one of the things that's really important is to have a new mortality awareness. And the pandemic kind of helped me do that, to realize that, yeah, we're living in quarters. This is it. This is the final quarter. And what do I want to do with that? What did I need to give up? I needed to give up this strong sense of ego, personality, leader kind of feeling, and consider how I could serve others, not just in social justice, but how could I be a real servant to others instead of leading them? I also had to do some shadow work, which I define by looking at those aspects of our personality that we have to kind of bury for a lot of our lives because they're not culturally acceptable things, like slowing down and having the inability to multitask, being dependent on others, and being a servant to others instead of leading others. These are all shadow attributes that many of us have to give up. And I had to look at them and say, why do I feel a sense of shame for feeling this way, for feeling lazy, for feeling like I don't want to work those 50-hour work weeks anymore? Those are cultural expectations that at times become just this baggage that we're dragging along that no longer serves us. Also looking in the mirror every morning and saying, I'm noticing my hair is getting a little thinner, wrinkles are getting a little deeper, earlobes are getting longer, can't wear heavy earrings anymore. But being okay with that and just looking in the mirror and saying, hello, old girl. Yes, you are an old girl now. But this is going to be the best day of your life. So back to gratitude. I know I said I was going to talk about gratitude this morning. I have for many years kept a gratitude journal where I write down in the evening 3 things that I've been grateful for that day. But I found that when I reached this point in my life where I was going through this major transition, whether it's from the outside in or the inside out, I think it requires us to deepen our practice of gratitude. We may not feel grateful for what lies ahead, but we can be grateful. We can practice being grateful. And so in the midst of this transition, I began practicing Galen Gingrich's first light meditation. And if you want to do this at home, you can find this on his website or just Google First Light Meditation and you can find this. But I want to go through it with you this morning, just as an example, and a spiritual practice that you can engage in every morning that will allow you to feel gratitude, regardless of what you're going to be facing that day. So I'm going to invite you now to just close your eyes, get comfortable, and imagine yourself doing this practice tomorrow morning. You're going to begin by lighting a candle, which is going to represent the light of this new day and the illumination that you're going to receive. during this practice. And you're going to pause to just pay attention to the breath that fills your lungs, the world in which you find yourself. And now let your mind drift to yesterday and think about whatever's past that you need to leave behind to live your best day. Maybe a disappointment or a commitment you didn't keep. Something about the past, maybe even if it feels shameful, and write this down. Then shift your attention to the present moment. Think about what your present concerns, fears, feelings are, things you might need at this moment. And write this down. Now open your mind to the new day and what is possible, what tasks you need to complete, and what attitudes you want to bring to this new day. And write that down. Read a daily meditation, which could be from a meditation manual. It could be poetry, scripture, whatever motivates you or encourages you. And consider what those words mean for you today, this precious day. And write that down. If you are comfortable praying, declare what it is you most desire for yourself on this day ahead and for your world. And write that down. End your time, this first light meditation, with this affirmation. I receive the gift of this new day with gratitude. I seek to accept all that is past. I seek to embrace all that is present. And I seek to realize all that is possible. The clarity of truth, the joy of beauty, the satisfaction of justice, the lure of adventure, the fullness of peace. I seek to be worthy of this new day. And then you extinguish your chalice or your candle and begin your day. We may not be in control of what happens to us each day, but we are always in control of how we meet each moment as it passes. Remember that today has never come before, and it will never come again. Each day is the only span of time in which we can live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, as Thoreau wrote. So be worthy of it. Amen and blessed be.